Aloha. Chapter 5. At 9:30 that night, Tom and Sid was sent to bed as usual. Sid was soon asleep, and Tom lay awake and waited, in restless impatience. It seemed to him that it must be nearly daylight. He heard the clock strike 10. This was despair. He would have tossed and fidgeted, but he was afraid he might wake Sid. Everything was dismally still. At last, he was satisfied that time had ceased and eternity had begun. He began to doze off, in spite of himself. The clock chimed 11, but he did not hear it. And then there came, mingling with his half-formed dreams, a most melancholy caterwauling. Caterwauling? Enjoy the rain. The raising of a neighborly window disturbed him. A cry of "Scat, you devil!" and the crash of an empty bottle brought him wide awake. And a minute later, he was dressed and out the window, creeping along the roof of the L. He meowed with caution, and then jumped to the roof of the woodshed, and thence to the ground. Huckleberry Finn was there, with his dead cat. The boys disappeared in the gloom. At the end of the half hour, they were wading through the tall grass of the graveyard. The graveyard was on a hill about a mile and a half from the village. It had a crazy board fence around it, which lead inward in places and outward the rest of the time. But it stood upright, no matter what, nowhere. Grass and weeds grew rank. All the old graves were sunk in it and round-topped. Worm-eaten boards staggered over them, leaning for support and finding none. Sacred to the memory of so-and-so had been painted on them once, but it could no longer have been read on most of them, even if there had been light. A faint wind moaned through the trees. The boys talked little, for the place oppressed their spirits. They found the sharp new heap they were seeking, and ensconced themselves within the protection of 3 great trees a few feet from the grave. They waited a long time. The hooting of an owl was all that troubled the dead stillness. At last, Tom said in a whisper, "Hucky, do you believe the dead people like it for us to be here?" I got the sniffles, sorry. Do I have corona? Huckleberry whispered, "I wishn't I knowed. It's awesome, but it's awful solemn." Boys canvassed this matter inwardly. Then Tom whispered, "Say, Hucky, do you reckon Hoss Williams hears us talking?" "Of course he does. Lest his spirit does. Least his spirit does. Spirit does." Tom, after a pause, "I wish I'd said Mr. Williams. But I never meant any harm. Everybody calls him Hoss. A body can't be too particular how they talk about these things, about these your dead people, Tom." This was a damper, and conversation died again. Presently, Tom seized his comrade's arm and said, "Shh! What is it, Tom?" And the two clung together. "Shh! There 'tis again. Didn't you hear it?" "Lord, Tom, they're coming. Sure. What'll we do?" "I don't know. I don't know. Think they'll see us?" "Tom, they can see in the dark, same as cats. I wishn't I hadn't come." They don't believe they'll. I don't believe they'll bother us. We ain't doing any harm. If we keep perfectly still, maybe they won't notice us at all. Listen." The boy scarcely breathed. A muffled sound of voices floated up from the far end of the graveyard. "Look, see there," whispered Tom. "What is it?" It's devil fire." "Oh, Tom, this is awful." Some vague figures approached through the gloom, swinging an old-fashioned tin lantern that freckled the ground with innumerable little spangles of light. Presently, Huckleberry whispered with a shudder, "It's the devils." Sure enough, 3 of them. "Lordy, Tom, we're goners. Can you pray?" "I'll try." "No, I lay me down some sleep. What is it, Huck?" "They're humans. One of them is, anyway. One of them is One of them's old Muff Potter's voice. Drunk, the same as usual. Likely. Blamed old Rip. Say, Huck, I know another of them voices. It's Injun Joe. That's so. That murdering half breed. I'd rather they devils as during light. What can they be up to? The whispers died wholly out. Now, for the three men had reached the grave and stood within a few feet from the boy's hiding place. Here it is, said a third voice, and the owner of it held their lantern up to reveal the face of young Dr. Robinson. Potter and Injun Joe were carrying a handbarrow with a rope and a couple of shovels on it. They cast down their load and began to open the grave. The doctor pulled the lantern at the head of the grave and came and sat down with his back against one of the trees. He was so close to the boys he could have touched them. Hurry, man, he said in a low voice. The moon might come out at any moment. They growled in response and went on digging. For some time there was no noise but the grating sound of the spades. It was very monotonous. Finally, a spade struck upon the coffin with a dull, woody accent, and within another minute or two, the men had hoisted it out of the ground. They pried off their lead and dumped the body rudely on the ground. The moon drifted from behind the clouds and exposed the pallid face. The corpse was placed on the barrow, covered with a blanket, and bound it to its place with a rope. Potter took out a large spring knife and cut off the dangly end of the rope, and then said, "Now the cussed thing's ready, Sawbones, and you're just out with another 5, or here she stays." "That's the talk," said Injun Joe. "Look here, what does this mean?" said the doctor. "You're required to pay you're required your pay in advance, and I've paid you." "Yes, and you've done more than that," said Injun Joe, approaching the doctor. 5 years ago, you drove me away from your father's kitchen one night when I asked for something to eat, and you said weren't there for any good. And when I swore I'd get even with you, your father had me jailed for a vagrant. Did you think I'd forgot? The Injun blood ain't in me for nothing. And now I've got you, and you got to settle. He was threatening the doctor, with his fist in his face by this time. The doctor struck out suddenly, stretched the ruffian on the ground. Potter dropped his knife and exclaimed, "Here, now, don't you hit me, pard. In the next moment he had grappled with the doctor, and the two were struggling with might and main, trampling the grass and tearing the ground with their heels. Injun Joe sprang to his feet, his eyes flaming, snatched up Potter's knife and went creeping, cat-like and stooping, round and round the combatants, seeking an opportunity. All at once the doctor flung himself free and seized the heavy headboard of William's grave and fell Potter with it. And in the same instant the half-breed saw his chance and drove the knife to the hilt in the young man's breast. He reeled and fell partly upon Potter, flooding him with his blood. And in the same moment the clouds blotted out the dreadful spectacle of the two frightened boys, and the two frightened boys went speeding away in the dark. Presently, when the moon emerged, Injun Joe was standing over two forms. The doctor gave a long gasp and two, and was still. The half-breed muttered, "That score is settled, damn you." Then he robbed the body, after which he put the fatal knife in Potter's right hand and sat down on the coffin. 3, 4, 5 minutes passed, and then Potter began to stir and moan. His hand closed upon the knife. He raised it, glanced at it, let fall with a shudder. Then he sat up, pushing the body from him. He gazed at it, and then around him, confusedly. His eyes met Joe's. "Lord, how is this, Joe?" he said. "It's a dirty business," said Joe, without moving. "What did you do it for?" I never done it. Look here. That kind of talk won't wash." Potter trembled and grew white. I thought I'd got sober. I had no business to drink tonight, but it's in my head yet. Worse than when what? Worse than when we started here. I'm all in a muddle. Can't recollect anything. Hardly. Tell me, Joe. Honest. No, old fella. Did I do it? Joe, I never meant to. Upon my soul and honor. Oh, it's awful. And him so young and promising. Joe, don't tell. Say you won't tell, Joe. I've always liked you, Joe, and stood up for you. You won't tell, will you, Joe? And the poor creature dropped on his knees before the stolid murderer and clasped his appealing hands. No, you've always been fair and square to me, Muff Potter, and I won't go back on you. There, now, that's as fair as a man can say. Oh, Joe, I bless you for this, the longest day I live. And Potter began to cry. Come now, this ain't any time for blubbering. You be off yonder way, and I'll go this. Move now, and don't leave any tracks. Potter started a trot that quickly increased to a run. The half-breed stood looking after him. He muttered, "He's as much stunned with the lick and fuddled with the rum as he had. If he's as much stunned with the lick and fuddled with the rum as he had the look of being, he won't think of the knife till he's gone so far that he'll be afraid to come back after it to such a place by himself." Chicken heart. What? Potter started to trot that quickly increased to a run. The half-breed stood looking after him. He muttered, "If he's as much stunned with the lick and fuddled with the rum as he had the look of being, he won't think of the knife till he's gone so far he'll be afraid to come back after it to such a place by himself." Chicken heart. 2 or 3 minutes later, the murdered man, the blanketed corpse, the lidless coffin, and the open grave were under no inspection but the moon's. The stillness was complete again, too. Bye bye. A reminder: I went outside. It was really nice, and I forgot how nice just being outdoors can be. So, I would recommend that, especially if you're like me and you've just been inside for this quarantine, try going outside. It's a good time. Okay, that is all. Peace out. Yeah. Yeah, boy.